about to hear a revolution in talk radio, Liberty Talk Radio, where the critical thinking will defrag your mind of propaganda-ridden viruses induced by mass media news programming. No BS here, just the facts.
And now we present to you America's quintessential iconoclastic anomaly. Wow. In talk radio, your host, Joe Cristiano.
Welcome, everyone, to Liberty Talk Radio, America's libertarian voice, broadcasting from our studio in Tulsa, Oklahoma, to around the world. I'm your host, Joe Cristiano, and this is your antidote to popular talk radio. Folks, it's time for us to take back control of our government now before this bureaucratic, oversized, and self-serving federal government starves us of our property, our freedom, our rights, and our liberty. But to do this, we must shed conventional thinking regarding our political structure. We need to be revolutionaries in thought, dissidents in action. Only after we recognize what our government is doing to our freedom and our Constitution will we start taking it back. And this program is just about that. Today we're pleased and honored to have as a guest, and we've had him on before. I've had to take a hiatus because of medical reasons and other things, and that turned up. But we're starting a new phase in Liberty Talk Radio, and our first guest is one of my favorites, if not my favorite, is the economist Andy Sutton, who was formerly from the financial community, however, now is involved for the sole purpose of blowing the whistle on corruption and helping people around the globe become their own advocates. He's a director of the Institute of Economic Awareness. Andy, welcome to Liberty Talk Radio.
Hi, Joe. How are you? It's always
fine,
a pleasure
Andy.
to be here.
Thank you so much.
We got this thing back together. Yeah.
Fine. Yeah, it's been a long time, hasn't it, Andy? Wow.
It has. It has.
Well,
and I'm glad to see that. I'm glad to see your health issues are resolved. I dealt with some pretty serious ones myself, and they're resolving as well. So
yeah,
hopefully 2019 is looking up for us.
Yeah, we're good for another 20 years, right?
I hope so. We'll see.
Okay. Well,
maybe
Andy,
they don't want us around for 20 more years.
Maybe someone will shoot us all together. Stormtroopers will come in the studio. Who knows? Anyway,
we keep this up, they might.
Andy, there's dozens of major subjects. In my opinion, let me put on a split screen. Can I put on a split screen here? Let's see. Here we go. Okay. All right. I have to get used to all the new buttons that we have here. But right now, there seems to be a cacophony of economic anomalies that are going on, none of which are very positive. And we can take any approach, and I think they'll all wind up basically in the same landing, that we're in trouble, we're in trouble, Houston, type thing. And I think I'd like to start with the subject of money, because I've been to meetings with professionals who've owned their own business, and we start talking about the economy, which gets everyone very nervous. I don't know why. No one wants to talk about the economy. It's amazing how people, they say, oh, don't worry. They actually say things like, Trump is in office now, and he'll make America great again. And I look at them, and I don't say anything, but what's in my head. I'm going, there's something wrong with that person. And here we have an economy that's built on debt. In fact, if you told the average person, not the average person, even the educated person, that money is in fact debt and comes from debt, and when you borrow money, they create more debt, and then they print more money, which is debt, and there's nothing backing our currency, they would think that you were clinically insane, because they actually believe that the dollar has a value. But we can go further than that and say, but we're not alone in this maze. The entire world is in the same boat. Oh, yeah. In fact, the dollar is in horrible shape. Some countries are even worse than we are. And I think there's only, of all the major countries, I think there's only one country that actually has a positive trade surplus and a domestic surplus. All the others are highly in debt, including countries like Japan. Anyway, my problem is I don't know where we are going when we're piling on debt, something like $3 million per minute or something else, $4 million per minute. Every day we pile on an additional $3 billion or more every day to the debt. And of course, we don't include the unfunded debt, all the off the balance sheet items, the unreconciled items, emergency military items. And when you include that, you're including trillions of dollars more. And I remember 2 years ago, we had Professor Kutlakoff, University of Boston, said 2 years ago, in his calculations, our debt was $223 trillion. And it's much worse today. I'm confused. Help me out.
Well, first of all, let's talk about words, because I've said this a zillion times. People are probably going, "Oh boy, here he goes again." words mean things. So a dollar, when we first came up with that term back in the late 1700s, a dollar was supposed to be a coin consisting of 371.25 grains of silver. And that was a dollar. It wasn't debt. It was an asset. And you have to understand the difference. So that was money. So when you're talking about something that is scarce, it has intrinsic value, it's a store of wealth, that's money. What we're using today, and what we've been using since really 1913, even though back then it was still sort of backed by gold, is currency. And currency doesn't have to be backed by anything. As the world knows now, it can be basically added to the system or withdrawn from the system at the whim of central bankers based on what they want to do. And I just go back to Thomas Jefferson, one of his quotes. He basically said, if you allow central banks to control the money supply of a nation, first by inflation, then by deflation, they will basically rob you to the point where you will be homeless on the continent that your fathers conquered. And he was absolutely right about that. First by inflation, then by deflation. Look at the Great Depression, the 1920s. All inflation, adding money to the system, fueled a huge speculative boom. That went bust. Everybody thinks that that was actually the cause of the Great Depression. It was not. Here's the thing. When stock prices go down, when oil prices go down, what do you hear on television? We're having deflation. Well, we can't say it out loud. We have to whisper it. Deflation. That's not true. That's not true. If you sit there and make a very small system with 10 or 12 people in it, introduce a money supply, introduce some stocks, have them trade them back and forth, you can drop the price to almost nothing on those stocks, and the money supply doesn't change at all.
Right.
The falling prices have nothing, they don't have a causative effect on the money supply. The money supply has a causative effect on price levels. So even if one price is falling, that doesn't mean that the money supply is shrinking, because other prices could be going up. You have to look at this from a general perspective, an aggregate perspective, and that's where like the whole economic, you talk about the political structure, this is where the whole economic structure has come unglued from reality, because everything is partial. Well, this is good, the stock market is going up, everything must be fine. And that's basically the extent of the thinking of the average person, and I don't blame the average person totally for this. We have lived for, how long, 90 years? Almost without really, keeping in mind that we've accumulated a heck of a lot of debt, we haven't had a serious economic catastrophe. So people are subject to what's called the normalcy bias. What's the normalcy bias? The normalcy bias is, hey, we're America, everything's great, and we'll get through this, whatever. It can't happen here. Bad things don't happen to America. That's the normalcy bias, because in our lifetime, nothing really, really catastrophic. And I'm even doing it right now, because think about 9/11. Think about 2008. Those were catastrophic events. But right there, you just heard the bias at work. And that was not me planning that. It's just the way it comes out. And that is how people think. So when they think about money, The idea that money is debt, they can't grasp that. The idea that currency is debt, they'll tell you, well, that's a conspiracy theory. No, it isn't. Pull a dollar out of your wallet, a dollar bill, and it's going to say Federal Reserve note on it. What is a note? A note is debt. It's a debt instrument. The Treasury of the United States issues a 10-year note, a 5-year note. So it's the same thing. You're trading debt instruments. Okay, so here comes the really good part. Now, you mentioned Dr. Kolikoff and his analysis of the situation. Not too long ago, the IMF came out and said that the world, all of us, in total, was in debt $184 trillion, which is an unimaginable amount of currency. It can never be repaid. That's how bad it is. And they're probably way off. It's, I'm sure, quite several orders of magnitude worse than that. Here's the kicker. So you look at national debt, which is the United States. You look at the second and third biggest national debts, you're looking at Japan. You're looking at, what? Japan? Wait, they buy our debt, but they're in debt. Then you look at China. They hold well over $1 trillion of our debt, but they're in debt too. They have a debt problem. Everybody has a debt problem. So the question isn't how much. The question is, who the heck is this owed to? And that you won't hear anywhere, I don't think. Nobody is asking the right questions. It doesn't matter if it's 184 or 242 or 468. It doesn't matter. It's who's the counterparty? Who's on the other side of this transaction? Is it the Federal Reserve? Is it the European Central Bank? Is it all of them together? You know, is it some mythical whatever? That's the question people need. Who's all this money owed to? Obviously, they basically coerced the world into entering into a contractual agreement with them, because that's what debt is, right? It's a contractual agreement. They did it by coercion. Basically, if you don't use our money, you're going to starve. So there's no contract. We don't owe them a penny. We don't owe them one stinking dime, because there was never an agreed upon set of terms for us using this debt. And the idea that, well, the U.S. government agreed to do it on your behalf, no, that doesn't work. The European Union, Spain, England, they use their own currency, but you get the idea. They pledge their people to be in debt to some unknown party for $184 trillion? I don't think so. But here's the problem. So, and this is why I'm so glad that we're back doing this, because it may already be too late, honestly. And the thing is, nobody's going to realize it until it hits the wall, because as long as people can get access to credit, and as long as people are willing to use credit and continue to use credit, it papers over what's going on. So real wages have been stagnant, but prices haven't, right? What filled the gap? In the 70s and 80s, we sent mom to work. And then when that, kind of wore off, amazingly, what comes on the scene? Store cards, credit cards. That fills the gap. Then you get to the end of the 90s. Okay, you got two breadwinners in a house. You've got credit cards, you got store cards. What happened next? Home equity loans. There always is some other debt vehicle to keep this locomotive going. And that's the only thing that keeps it going. So if people don't wake up really, really, really soon, I mean, it's already like we're shooting a BB gun at a freight train. But if people don't wake up and get their heads out of the sand really soon, it's going to be too late. And like I said, it may already be too late economically, because the consequences always lag the times. So right now, what does a credit card do? It pushes off payment, right? Of course. What do you think all this debt does? It delays payment, but the payment's due. It's due. It's not due until next year or 5 years from now, depending on what you're using it, but it's due. And Europe, Greece, Cyprus, Italy now, Spain, Portugal, Ireland, all these countries. Poland did a 50% lop right off the top of the pension plans 5, 6, 7 years ago. Cyprus swiped depositor money to cover up bank failures. It's all because of debt. And guess who's in debt too? The banks are. How do you think 2008 happened? Banks were over leveraged. Then they bought all these crappy mortgage bonds, and the whole thing kind of went and folded in on itself. And then they run to Congress and they say, well, if you don't bail us out, everything's going to come to a screeching halt. And so on we go. And guess what they're doing again? It's the same thing all over again, Joe. Only this time, it's not subprime mortgage loans. This time, it's sour corporate debt. See, companies have been making record earnings, but they have record debt on their balance sheets as well. So where do you think the earnings have been coming from? They're being borrowed. How do you think a lot of companies are maintaining dividend programs? They're borrowing. The whole thing, like you said, at the outset, the whole thing is centered on debt. Debt. And yeah, I sound like a broken record, but that's what it is. And people just they don't want to hear it. They don't want to hear it. You know what? Blah, 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 blah. Charlie Brown's parents. I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear it. I'm going to go do what I'm going to do, darn it, because I'm an American and I'm entitled to it. Guess what? Wrong answer.
Right.
It's going to come to an end. And the problem with this is the longer this goes on, the more immune people feel. Oh, well, those guys have been yelling about this for how long now, and nothing's really happened. They're wrong. It's fine. So we run that risk. We run the risk of being the little boy who cried wolf. And the problem is eventually we're going to be right. But we may be dead. And that's one thing I'm absolutely convinced of, is that this establishment that runs this cartel, this international banking syndicate that manages this on behalf of who knows who, they're extremely good at keeping it going and kicking the can down the road. And and I'm convinced, as long as they can get more pledges, and remember, this currency is not worth anything. So they don't really care about money per se or currency per se. What this is about is labor. And I believe that we're going to go into an era at some point in the future of kind of like neo-feudalism, where you're going to have your lords, your serfs, your slaves, and they're going to be debt slaves. People forget history. We used to have debtors' prisons in certain parts of the world. In certain parts of the world, we still do. There was a stigma attached to it. You don't borrow money from somebody and then not pay them back. Or you don't borrow money from somebody and then try to dilute the value of their payment by overprinting your own currency, like most of the first world is doing. It's just, there's going to be consequences. There's laws, you break them, there's consequences. Yeah, you might have gotten away from this speed trap. Yeah, they got us pretty good in 2008. But then that's what it's going to be. And further along, I believe that whenever we switch over to another system, go on usdebtclock.org, look what the amount of debt is per U.S. citizen. I believe you, myself, our kids, grandkids, whatever, are going to be responsible for working off their share of their country's debt. Mm-hmm. That's where I believe we're going. Yeah. Because we've been there before. It's history. Yeah. Not in this, the terms have kind of changed a little bit and all that sort of thing, but it's the same idea. You're in debt, you work it off. Simple. Not you sit on your couch and rack up more debt. That's not how it worked back in feudal times. Yeah. So unfortunately, it's a dim picture, but it needs to be painted, because, yeah, you're not going to say the U.S. government, forget it. That's over. That national debt, that $22 trillion now, you're not going to reverse that. Nobody even wants to. Nobody in government at any level, state, local, federal, nobody even has a desire to reverse it. Nobody has a desire to slow down spending. nobody even has we're going back to $1 trillion deficits now at the federal level.
Yes.
And that's not even counting it properly.
Right.
That's not using generally accepted accounting principles. That is, actual terms. It doesn't count, interest on certain things. It doesn't count unfunded liabilities. All these programs, Social Security, Medicare, they're all broke. Everything's broke. The states are broke. The pensions are broke. The only thing really that's not broke is that package of retirement assets that are owned by individuals for now.
Yeah.
That's what I worry the most about for people. I think those are going to get taken to at some point, and it'll be to resolve an important national crisis. And if you don't do it, then you're going to be told that, hey, then, your life as you know it is over, and there's going to be no more Walmart, and no more casinos and no more sports. Oh my gosh, what happened if there was no Super Bowl? Oh, that'd be terrible. That'd be horrible. But seriously, think about it. This is all you have to tell people for the most part, and they'll do whatever you want them to do. They're like modeling clay. These guys just sit there and they get this one to say this and they get this one to say that, and they just model things the way they want them, and people they allow it. So that's kind of where we're at with the whole money thing. It's not about money. It's not even about the currency. It's about the labor that's going to be used to pay it off. We're going to have to work it off.
Yeah.
What I want to know, though, is who it's owed to. So if there's anybody listening that has any kind of influence or position of authority, Ron Paul, are you out there?
Yeah.
Tell please. And why do you think they wouldn't let him audit the Fed? I mean, really? Yeah. That will never be allowed, because there's so much garbage and dirt in that place that, you could send 1,000 accountants in there and it would take them 1,000 years to figure out the first thing.
Right.
That's how corrupt that place is. And every other central bank is the exact same way. It's not just ours.
Yeah. Well, thank you for making me feel so good. I was kind of down when I started out.
Right.
Now I really am supercharged.
Yeah.
You know that. Well,
you got
just
a little adrenaline shot.
Just the other day, they were questioning President Trump about the wall, and they said, "But at least the news person with the microphone had the guts to ask." They said, "But where are you going to get the money?" He said, "We have plenty of money." He says, "Money's not the problem."
Really?
He says, "We have plenty of money," and you want to scream, and of course, people who are watching this are saying, "Well, see." You've got to be wrong, Andy.
We have the money.
The president said we have plenty of money. You obviously are misinformed. And I guess I come from an era where there was no debt. There was no such thing as debt. And God forbid you owed somebody money. I mean, it was, you were in trouble. And when I say money, I mean $2 or 68 cents. You didn't owe that money. My mother used to give me like 60 cents to go to Morris's grocery store downstairs. We lived on top of the grocery store. And God forbid, I didn't come back with the exact amount of change to the penny. I didn't buy anything extra or anything. I got everything. And if there was a discrepancy, she went down and there was all hell to break loose. And you think today where, of course people think they have money, because if you look at the TV ads, they never give you the price of the car. They just said, hey, only so much down, no payments for 3 months. You get 6 or 7 years to pay, and you can have this wonderful car. And they don't tell you that.
Lasts 4.
God forbid you miss a payment, your interest rate goes up fourfold. I mean, but everything is that way.
Interest,
Everything is that way. I've hired many young men. When I say young, I mean in their 20s, and for my companies, and even when I had the studio at the Cityplex building, and I always ask them. I say, what did you do before? We just start talking, and it's amazing that they talk about their debt. they said, well, I just bought a car, but I can't afford it. I have $24,000 on my credit card. I said, and I usually ask, I said, you have a student loan? They go, oh yeah. How much is it? Oh, it's about $51,000. Well, are you making payments? No, I haven't made any payments yet. It's incredible. I mean, if I was running a relatively large business and had the debt of a teenager today, or a person in their early 20s, I'd consider myself in bankruptcy. But yet they just roll with it, and they have part-time jobs, as they say. They live in the basement of their mother's house, and they're 24, 28 years old, and you go, this is not right. But we don't mention debt. We never mention debt.
No.
I think George Orwell had it right. You put it on TV, and you mesmerize people as to exactly how to think. And we've done a marvelous job of dumbing down people. And by the way, I want to ask you a question. I've meant to ask you this 100 times, and I keep on forgetting. Maybe this time I'll remember. Is that we keep on talking about the worst depression was 1929. Actually, the worst depression was during Calvin Coolidge in 1921. It was much worse, but it bounced back. And I suspect, and this is only my suspicion because I'm cynical, is that the reason why we never mention is because Calvin Coolidge reduced the size of the government 50% and told industry, go, all the restrictions are off. You know how to run a business. You do it. And within 18 months, we had a booming economy. Well, they can't put that in the textbook because that'll say government bad, free enterprise is good. Am I right, or do I have that all screwed up?
No, and the central bank was also very accommodative with the monetary policy during the expansion as well. But here's the thing: if you have an economy that is growing, and you have some sort of currency standard, you have to have enough currency in the system, whether it's digital or fungible, as in bills. You have to have enough to lubricate the economy effectively. If you don't have enough, transactions won't take place because there won't be enough money supply money is very transactional in nature. People ask, how is it that we can owe $22 trillion and by all measurements, because they don't tell us anymore because apparently we're not capable of comprehending it, the money supply is considerably less than that, the total money supply. Well, how can that be? Well, it's very simple. Money is transactional. I pay you $100 for something. I get the something. You get the $100. You take that $100 and you go buy something from somebody else. Somebody else takes that $100 and they buy something from me. It's the same $100, but there's 3 transactions.
Right.
So you don't need 22 trillion to pay off the national debt. What you do need to do, though, what you do need to do is stop the bleeding. Namely, in our case, to put a tourniquet on the femoral artery, because that's the one that's bleeding the most. Yeah. And we are just nobody has the willpower. And furthermore, if we did stop the borrowing, you would see an instant depression in this country. That's how much we're borrowing. If we stopped, if you take all the credit cards, all the auto loans, all the mortgages, or even cut it in half, and say we'll just cut our borrowing by 50%. We'll still do the student loans and maybe not as much mortgage, whatever. You'd still have an instant GDP would be negative. You would have a depression on your hands. That's how far into this thing we are. It would take us years, decades to unwind this slowly. If we got the right mind about it right now, today, and said, all right, this year we're gonna phase this thing out, and then next year we're gonna phase that thing out. The problem is, where are all these, everybody said we need to bring the troops home. Yeah, we do. What are they gonna do? Are they gonna work at Starbucks? That's the problem. The government's giving these people jobs because there's no place to hire them in the public sector. That's another big distortion, is this whole employment picture. And the unemployment numbers are probably the most political numbers there are, right, aside from maybe consumer prices and oil. not even GDP, because most people they never made the switch from when it was called gross national product to gross domestic product. People lost it when that switch was made. So you're talking about very political numbers. There's every motive for the government to lie like a rug about prices and employment, and they do so very liberally whenever it's to their advantage. So this whole 3.3% unemployment or whatever, that's full employment basically is somewhere around 5%. So what they're saying is there is nobody anywhere in the United States that's looking for a job. That's basically what they're saying.
Right.
So, but here's the problem. All those people that signed up for unemployment and then they got their unemployment and then they fell off at the back end, the government considers them working. That's not true. What if they're not working? What if they're at home? Or maybe they're working 15 hours somewhere, but they really want to work 40 hours. Well, we have a measurement for that. Yeah, and that's too low too, because there's games with that. So you've got the whole unemployment thing. That's another huge distortion. You can talk to people anywhere. And one of the things that's I'm really liking about what we're doing with the Institute, and that's why I renamed it, is it's like there's 4 people involved already. And they're from 4 different countries. So I'm kind of like fronting the whole thing, but these other people, they're volunteering their time and they're doing things. One guy is setting up a consumer price index in the UK. There's another fellow who's doing the same thing down in Australia. So we've got people just, some people are doing observations, some people are collecting data, a couple hours a week, they're chipping in, and, it all kind of comes in. And then Graham and I, we sift through it and we figure out, all right, what should we publish? What should we use? Should we follow this? We should maybe direct them to collect some slightly different data. So it's kind of cool. It's a huge collaboration, which is really nice. And I'm hoping we get more people involved, because this is not some Pandora's box economics that is impossible to understand. It is very simple. The reason why people don't understand it is because it's been made to be to the point where you can't understand it. That's how much gobbledygook has been added to it. And if you don't understand it, you're better off, your chances are you're going to ignore it, right? Well, I don't really know what that doctor is doing to my leg. Whatever. He knows what he's doing. I'll let him go. That's what happens with economics, finance, things like that. People, I don't understand that. I can't understand that. That's too complicated. It really isn't. If you have a limited supply of something, it's going to have value, especially if it's desirable. There's your money right there. There's Indian tribes that use precious stones. You can use anything. You could use barrels of oil for money. You could use, Venezuela just set up a crypto-backed currency. So I'm not into that whole crypto thing. I think that's another big scam, and I think it's a mistake on Venezuela's part. But you can do it if it's something that's desired. And cryptocurrencies are something that are desired by a lot of people now. So that's the point. Anything that's worth anything can be a money. So you can set that up. But the whole job situation, again, this is where we got away from looking at the big picture. When you look at aggregate demand globally, it's falling. So what does that tell us? That tells us that the economy globally is slowing down. Well, golly, it's no wonder. It's all tied together. Every country is tied on the back of every other country. So when one slows down, the whole thing slows down. And that's what's happening. So what's going to happen now? Well, they're going to keep borrowing, and eventually probably we'll be borrowing $10 to create $1 of growth. That's how bad it is. Yeah. Right now we're creating about $3.50 to $4 we have to borrow to create $1 of growth. That's a losing proposition.
When Trump was running for office, Andy, he said so many things that were true. He said, the unemployment rate is not 3%. He says it's closer to, he says, I've heard numbers like 42%, and et cetera, et cetera. And he was right. As a candidate, a lot of what he said was absolutely correct. And then as soon as he got into office, he said, Look what a great job. After a few months, look what a great job I'm doing. He says the unemployment rate's only 3%. And
it went from
no one
42 to 3
screamed.
overnight.
No one screamed.
No.
They should have been screaming from the rooftop saying, get this bum out of office. You know, he's lying to us right from the get-go. And yet people who voted for him said, look what a great job he's doing. Unemployment rate's only 3%. And these are intelligent people with educations and all that. They believe this stuff. I think to myself, have they been brainwashed to a point where they can no longer think for themselves? If they don't hear it on TV, they don't know it exists?
You might be right. I don't know. I thought the same thing you did. How did the unemployment rate go from, I forget what the number he said was, but it was very high. How did it go from that to 3% in like 2 months? It's ridiculous. But this is my opinion now. I don't have any facts to really back this up, just observations. I think these guys are pretty much allowed to say whatever they want when they're campaigning. And then, when somebody finally decides who's going to be, who the puppet's going to be, then I think that's when they get told, all right, this is how things work.
Yeah.
This is what's going to happen. This is the agenda. This is what you're going to do. This is what you're not going to do. And I think that's why so many of them break their promises. It's not maybe that they're intentionally being, deceptive of the public. It's just, no, I didn't realize that's how it was. I think there's a lot of naivete, and I think these types of offices appeal to people, with egos, to be totally honest with you. Well, I could fix that. You know what? I sure as hell couldn't fix it. I wouldn't want that job. You couldn't pay me enough to take any job in the federal government that had anything to do with policy, because other than analyzing it, that's about it. Forming policy, you look at these bills, there's 2,500 pages sometimes. The healthcare bill was like 2,700 pages of pure Sanskrit.
Right.
You can't read it. You can't even possibly fathom it. No wonder we had it pass it before we could find out what was in it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't think they knew. I mean, who did this? Who wrote this? You know what I mean? Where does this stuff come from? But you're right.
Nancy Pelosi, she wrote it. I'm sure she did.
Yeah, she wrote it. I'm Santa Claus.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's, and I don't like to get into the individuals involved. I'd rather focus
I know,
on
me
policy.
neither. I agree. Yeah.
Because it doesn't. Here's the thing: you're in New York City. You want to get to Los Angeles. You're going to use the road system, the interstates. How many ways are there to get to Los Angeles from New York? Well, you can hop right on Route 80 and go straight and go west. That's one way. Or you can take the long way and you can go up, through the Dakotas and whatnot, and then wander your way back down. I don't know all the numbers off the top of my head, but you get the point. There's a bunch of different ways you can get there.
Sure.
And that's the way this whole deal is right now, with the money situation, the debt situation, the economy. There's a lot of different ways to get to where the end point of this thing is. And what we have here is a binary system. It's either one or the other, 0 or 1, this or that. There's your two-party system. A lot of other countries do it the same way. They have a binary system also. Some of them have 7 parties, so they do it a little bit different. Here's the point. We're going to get to the end of that debt road, no matter who's driving the car. It might look, the view might be totally different. If you drive up through the Dakotas, you're going to see a lot of, bleh kind of stuff. Whereas if you take the southern route, you can see some more interesting things. You might catch some national landmarks. It might be a more exciting ride. The point is, you're still going to end up at the same place. And that's what's been happening. Basically the political system in this country has been playing economic hot potato with the future of the country for really, the last 50 years for sure, probably longer, but 50 years for sure, easily. And we're going in the same direction. It doesn't matter who's driving. And I think that if people understood that, or if people stopped and just thought, you know what, let's look back, let's see what's happened. Here's this, here's some landmarks. I think they'd realize it. It doesn't take a lot of thought, but the problem is you have to overcome like the Orwellian Goebbels type misinformation that is just jammed down our throats constantly. And what did Goebbels say? Pick a lie, make it a big one, right? Not a little one, make it a whopper, and just tell it over and over again, and eventually it'll become the truth. And that's how people react to that. And this guy was brilliant. He should have used it for something beneficial. That's exactly how people, the master psychologist, Goebbels.
That's right.
Eric Blair, Orwell, master psychologist. Understood sociology very well, how people interact, that kind of thing. A lot of that is the basis for economics when you think about it. So what, as an economist, what do? You watch people. You see what people do. You watch what businesses do. You watch what governments do. But a lot of it's observation. You don't have to sit there with chalkboards and, numbers all over the place and all that kind of stuff. You can look very qualitatively at economics and come up with some very logical and real conclusions. I guess that's my point, is don't give up on the whole thing. You got to try to understand it.
Well, if you really understand it, then you can take steps personally to at least buffer yourself somewhat from the carnage that is about to unroll on us. And it will happen. It'll happen in time. And I'm not saying it's going to happen tomorrow or even next year, but it will happen, and it most likely will happen before I leave this place. Jim Rogers has said more than one occasion, they always ask Jim Rogers, well, when do you think this collapse will occur? When do you think the next depression will occur? He says, I'm not that smart. He says, I don't know when anything's going to happen. He says, but it will. But when it does happen, it'll be the worst this country and this world has ever known. And he says, that's a guarantee. I can't give you a date. And he's absolutely correct. And I'm convinced that we don't select the brightest minds in government to run things. When Nancy Pelosi was made Speaker of the House, that put the cap on it all. You have to you select the most corrupt. The most corrupt is the person who gets selected. And that's my opinion, and my opinion only. But I mean, because when she speaks, she makes practically no sense whatsoever. She doesn't seem like she has a brain cell working, and yet she has the third highest level. I mean, next to the president, vice president, speaker of the House. If something happened to those two guys, she'd be president. My God, I mean, that should make us really feel very uneasy right now. But what bothers me is that people in Congress know this. They know she's not the sharpest pencil in the drawer, and they select her. Well, that is tell you about them. Well, they're just as corrupt as she is. So we have one big corrupt organization that's gigantic, sucking the blood out of each one of us, and in the form of money.
Well, in the form of money and pledges of future endeavors. Really,
that's right.
And that's the thing. You made a good point. If you understand this a little bit, and there's actionable information and things that you can do right now. First thing is, sit down and get yourself one of those little notebooks that you buy, those little spiral bound deals. They fit right in your pocket. And I challenge everybody who ends up listening to this show to do it. For 30 days, anytime you spend more than $1 on something, write it in your book and see where your money goes. You can't fix the problem until you know what it is, right? I've had every one of my people that I've counseled on financial matters, I have them do this. And if they won't do it, then I do some pro bono stuff now, since I got out of the business. But if they won't do that, then I won't work with them. Because as far as I'm concerned, if they're not willing to examine where the problem lies, then they're really not interested in fixing it. But anyway, they do for the most part. And you would be amazed. $475 a month on coffee and bagels in the morning.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I know.
That is an actual number. Yes, $475 a month on coffee and bagels in the morning. That was reduced to $50 some, $40 some. by going and getting bagels at a grocery store.
Yeah.
And getting a coffee maker and making your own coffee.
Yeah.
So I mean that was a 90% cut in spending. See, that is what our local, state, and federal governments have to do if they want to convince anybody that they're even remotely serious about doing this. And when excuse me, when you have a Congress that rubber stamps a tax cut that is put directly on the federal deficit and therefore the national debt, you know that there's nobody interested in really fixing anything. What they're doing is continuing to borrow from tomorrow to pay for today.
Yeah.
There's no interest in changing that mindset.
Yeah.
That's what that told me. Nobody's interested. And you know what? Did you hear a single person bring that up in an interview? Or, yeah, there were some editorials about it, written by people like us. But did you really hear anybody who has an Alphabet Soup network or something along those lines even mention that? Where did this money come from? Oh, we have lots of money. Well, that's not exactly false. We do. We just have way, way more debt.
Right. Yeah. I read an article.
We do have assets in this country. It is a balance sheet. There's assets, there's liabilities, but we have negative equity because our liabilities exceed our assets.
Yeah.
So we're not in very good shape. So we really don't have money.
Yeah. I've read a few articles recently about, how the wealthy, not necessarily the super wealthy, the billionaires, but wealthy people and how they spend their money. And every article was the same. They basically don't. I mean, they're very frugal. Yeah. They have millions of dollars, but the way they spend their money, you think they were still pinching pennies. They just watch everything that goes out, and that's the way they always lived, and that's why they have money. Anyway, Andy, we're about at the end of our time right now. It's only a couple of minutes. Yeah, witching hour. It's about. Well, I'm so pleased that we're back on target. Maybe we can do this. Could we do this on a more regular basis? I'll be in contact with you to see when you're available. Okay, and we'll do that. And I'd like to give you the last 30 seconds to wrap things up and tell our audience how they can reach you if you'd like to do that.
Sure. Thank you. Hey, listen, folks. All this sounded pretty awful. And it is. I guarantee you the longer that this situation goes on, the worse it will be when it does finally have to unwind. But there are things you can do in the meantime to kind of keep yourself away from it as much as possible. So what I would encourage people to do is visit the website. It's andysutton.com/blog. I haven't changed that yet to reflect that there's a collaboration right now because all my past articles are linked to that website, so I'm kind of stuck with it for now. We're trying to figure out what to do with that. If you're interested in helping us out, there's a contact form on the webpage. Just go there and send us a contact form, and we'll get in touch with you and see what we can do. So we'll take any kind of help we can get. Joe, I appreciate it as always. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, Andy. Appreciate it. And
you're welcome.
We'll be together again soon, okay?
Sounds like a plan.
All right. Thank you very much.